So if you would like, I will begin, or would you like me to wait for it?
That'd be our guest. You begin.
Okay, my name is Robert Ethier. I'm the health agent for the Wareham Board of Health. I've been with the Wareham Board of Health for 9 years. This is the budget that we're working with at this point. I will say that before I got here, the staff in the Board of Health was doubled. I'm mostly working with part-time people. You'll see as I read down through the expenses of the budget that articles like cellular and different articles in here are paid for myself and my part-time assistant inspector through grant funds through the Plymouth County coalition that I belong to. It's the Plymouth County Health Agents, along with the Department of Public Health and CDC funding, who pays for my telephone. They pay for the cost of the telephone throughout the year, and that's been like that for 6 years, so that helps out with the budget. They also pay for my computers, my laptop computers, AEDs that I distributed through the town, so it is a good source. The money there is somewhat drying up also, so I'm a little concerned about the future budgets. But I'll start off by saying that under personnel service, the total cost for salaries is $162,142. Advertising here, it's self-explanatory. That's in this business, we have to change our regulations, which requires advertisements a certain amount, a certain number of days, as per the regulations, and that's usually $300 a year. All office supplies, that's around $1,600, and that's for everything you need to operate the office, the mailings, whatever you need. Let me see, $1,600. Now here's under other purchase services, that used to be a lot higher. And what is paid for under other purchase services is the Cape Cod VNA. We hire out a Cape Cod VNA service, which is a lot cheaper. Historically, we've had nurses in the Board of Health, and by the time you pay their salary and their benefits, it far outweighs the value. So it's been my experience since I've got here to contract with the Cape Cod VNA. The total amount of the contract is $15,000 a year. Now, in the Board of Health, we get notified by doctors and hospitals, and as much as pediatricians and veterinarians about disease reports. That's required by the state. If the person has a reportable disease, it comes to the Board of Health. It has to be handled. The forms have to be filled out. Everything's compiled and sent back to the DPH with an answer to how we would approach that. And that's done by the VNA. The VNA puts on 2 to 3 flu clinics a year for us. And some people here that have been there can see that it's done very well. Nobody waits anymore. And the other service that they provide is every Thursday next door at the multi-service center on the 5th floor. We have a clinic to check blood pressure, to give people injections. They bring their medications with them, and the nurse there will do that. So that's all covered under this. I noticed that it went down from the request that I had for 13. It's, well, I guess it's, excuse me one second. The other thing that goes on that other purchase services is we have the Cape Cod VNA, and we have a sharps collection program. CMAS contacted me in my first or second year here and said that a lot of people are getting stuck or pinpricked with needles that were used by diabetics and for other purposes, cancer injections or whatever, and they would like them out of the waste stream. So working with our volunteers at the recycle center, we set up a little shed, and they've done a great job. We instruct the people to put their needles in a certain container and tape it off, and it's put in there. Now, this is another thing. When it first started a few years ago, I was granted $2,000 from the coalition to get the program started. That money's out now. It's not in my budget anymore. So the rest of that money that's in other purchase services goes to paying for that. And that could be as much as $600 to $1,000 a year to pick up, drop off new containers, and incinerate what we've accumulated over the last few months. So the total year is $600 to $1,000. Repairs and maintenance, that's just repairs to copy machine that we have. We have an agreement, but in case that some of the stuff doesn't cover that, then that's in there. For the vehicle that I drive, that's not in good repair and needs replacement badly, that is covered in some of the expenses there. Vehicle supplies, the same thing for tires and oil changes or whatever. And that's about it in the total budget. I would like to ask for another part-time person. At some point, I was asked to do a level-funded budget, but we're working on regulations, and people are expecting regulations changes that deal with nitrogen and other things in town, so we're working on that, and if that ever happens, that's going to require someone to oversee that program also, either a part-time person or a full-time person. The other thing is, I tried to work on this last year. I have a program in mind, and that's a housing inspection program. We spend a lot of our time on garbage and nuisance complaints. Substandard housing is rampant in Wareham. It takes up most of our time. We have a grant from CEDA that pays for a part-time gentleman that does 4 of these a week. He's 19 hours. He does 4 a week. Sometimes in the summertime we get 10 garbage and nuisance complaints a week. And that deals with everything from garbage in the yard, the land, or the house, according to the state sanitary code, all the way up to condemnations. I would like to get a program eventually, if there was ever some money to put into the Board of Health budget, to have a part-time person to deal with the nitrogen if the regulations change, and a part-time person to deal with housing issues. If we had a housing inspection program, I estimated anywhere from $20,000 to $40,000, but depending on the rentals. There's a lot of people that rent in Wareham. They rent illegally, not according to the state sanitary code. That code expects that a renter or and especially a landlord comply with the code. That means the temperatures at certain times of the year in the house have to be this, and they're not in a lot of cases. You have to have screens on all the windows, and they can't be broken. And the front doors and rear doors have to have screens on them for ventilation. That doesn't always happen. We find complaints everywhere we go, from not supplying the proper fire equipment in the house, or carbon monoxide detectors, or whatever it is, porches that are not adequate, or room sizes that aren't adequate. So someday in the future, that's my goal, to get someone to handle all of these and to have income coming into town. Now when we're called out, there's no money that we gather from any of these, it's just time out from doing public health stuff, dealing with garbage and nuisance complaints. So in the future, we'll be able to charge for a permit that says, here is your state form, this is what you meet, and this is good for the landlords also, because if the tenants don't keep up with what's on that form, then the landlords have a form that says it was good when I went in there. So also, it would be a moneymaker, and we would not be going out for nothing, we'd be making money, and it would cut down on all these issues. These landlords don't know that there's a code. Most of them don't. They're in other towns, they bought it at auction, and then they just send somebody in there. So that's our goal. And I'll entertain any questions or answer any questions for any one of you.
Mr. Trudell?
Of course, I'd just like to say that I see nothing but favorable comments in the newspapers, so whatever you're doing, it seems to be working well.
Thank you very much.
You mentioned more help. Do you have a swag on the cost of that employee?
Not at this point. I do have it on I have a whole workup on this program, and I would think that
Just a swag.
yeah, I would think that anywhere from $150 a day for this employee, and per week if it's a full-time employee plus benefits. I think that's somewhere around what it would be, anywhere from $40,000 to $50,000, I would think.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Brown?
Well, Mr. Chairman, being the liaison for the Board of Health, I can tell you right off, your budget is so far under budget, it's ridiculous. If anything becomes part of the nitrogen, you definitely are going to have somebody to work on this thing, this project alone. But the housing money that is out there and available, and it's really our, as a citizens of Wareham, it's our responsibility to make sure that people are renting safe housing, and we don't have the manpower to inspect it. If they're not funded by Mass Housing or HUD, these landlords are getting away with unbelievable stuff. And even if it's a HUD or a state, the city of Boston and many other cities charge, every time you turn over a unit, they charge $50 to go in and inspect this unit to make sure it's up to the state sanitary code. And there's a lot of state sanitary code violations that are definitely happening in our housing stock right now and are not being attended to. And I would strongly urge the town administrator to look into this budget particularly, because we're always talking about safety for the citizens of Wareham when it comes to the police department and this, but this is an area that is truly getting neglected. I've been in his office and he's had an inspection to come out, to go out and look at, or whether it be a Title V, and he couldn't go do it because there was nobody in the office to cover it. So I hope I've made my point that this budget is seriously underfunded.
Mr. Trudell, I believe you also indicated. I'm sorry, Mr. Paulson?
Mr. Paulson came before me.
I know, that's Mr. Paulson.
Why not use the senior work-off people? I mean, we have some people that take cameras out, take pictures of dilapidated properties, and bring them back in. I'm just curious if that's been thought of as a possibility.
Clerk, please. To answer the question.
Well, some of these sites are quite dangerous, for one. You really have to have a knowledge of the code. Most of these involve court cases. That's how bad it gets. I'm in court now on an average of 2 times a week, just on housing issues. And I think you really need a background in enforcement. Some of these people aren't very happy with you being there, and it is quite difficult. So I would say, nothing against the senior work program. I think it's great, but I just think that it's a little bit more involved than that.
Well, let me just pursue this just for a moment. We've got about maybe 70 or 80 people on that program. Is it possible at least that maybe 1 or 2 of them might have some background that would be satisfactory? I don't know.
Yeah, well,
But at least I mean, we're saying we have a problem, we don't have the funds, and I'm trying to figure out a way myself to address the issue. I understand your point.
yeah, I would say that you need a background in public health for 1, and you would need a background in housing for 2, and it's just not something you can go down and write a letter and say, you know, this is, you got to understand the code, you got to understand the Commonwealth of Massachusetts regulations, so you really need somebody trained.
All right, thank you. Don?
One of the great things about this budget process is, as I went through earlier, and I marked off the departments, and I didn't see anything on your page, and but no questions. Then you started talking, and so the big problem I have, remember when I look at other purchase of services, and you're saying that there's $15,108 in the budget, you already covered the $15,000 with the contract for the flu shots and other services you do, and then you had a Sharps collection, so you're already over budget. And our goal in life in the town of Wareham is not to go over budget. So I don't know if there's any plans to increase his budget to actually cover what is pretty much a standard expense or not. I don't know, but that's one question. Then you mentioned the vehicle, and they have repairs of $1,300. How old is that vehicle?
That vehicle, I believe, is 2003.
Okay, and what's wrong with it, that $1,300 is a lot of money to repair a vehicle, so.
Right.
Is that enough? Well, I guess that's the real question.
I was just at the DPW yesterday. It doesn't come out of four-wheel drive for some reasons. They're going to look at that. It's just constant problems. Now there's a knock in the engine. I talked to both mechanics yesterday, and they said you're going to have to drive it because we're not going to be able to afford a new engine. It's just going to have to go till it stops. It was well used. It's an old EMS vehicle that was hand-me-down, and it's been used, and it's seen better days.
When I first, my first foray into any kind of a committee was I was on the Buzzards Bay Coalition on nitrogen pollution, and I've been following, obviously I'm no longer part of that, but I've been following this, and if these nitrogen regulations go into place, there's going to be a serious need for enforcement. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So you're going to have all kinds of issues on that side as well, unless we add another person, or you'll have to come up with some sort of a thing for that. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct, sir.
Okay. Then the other thing, you mentioned this inspection services, and I'm all about revenue. I think that's one thing the town really has to look at, is how to generate revenue. Have you seen any other towns that have this type of program?
Yes, I have.
Okay.
And Barnstable's one of them. Some of the bigger cities, they have housing programs. And between the fees and the fines, if they're not up to code, it's not me bringing them before the board and then taking them to court when they don't. It's fines right on the spot, or you're able to close them down. There's still issues with the people that live there. You can't throw them on the street, so you try to get compliance any way you can. But yes, there's other towns that are quite successful,
Right.
and they don't answer 10 of these a week.
Okay. Something maybe we can pursue as well.
Any other questions? Questions?
Well, just a point, it's a very important point, that the Department of Housing and Urban Development spend $500 a year for one inspector to come out that is trained in a REAC inspection. And to answer your question, Dick, is basically the codes are changing constantly. You pull cords, you're this, you're that. And what he's facing is tremendous. It's a tremendous, and there's a lot of systems out there that are not nitrogen, but they're put in for wells that are too close to septic systems, and they had to put systems in. They can't even get out and inspect them. I know of some that aren't even working. Nobody's been out there to look at them. So, public safety, I see this as, well, you can see I'm passionate about it. I really think it's a way to generate income and make sure that the people of this town that are renting clean, sanitary places.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Trudell?
through you to Health Department. Okay, you told me 40 to 50K annually for a person as a scientific wild guess. So the next logical question is, for another slag that says, how much revenue would this person generate? And realizing it goes into the town coffers, so it kind of disappears in his rate.
Right.
But, do you have some kind of pie-in-the-sky number that says, you know, if I go out and spend $40,000 on an individual plus my benefits with printing to 50, 70K level, how much return do I get out of this so I know what the net cost mentally is?
That's a good question. I tried to work it up based on housing programs in other towns and what they bring in. It's hard to even know what we have out there for housing units. It really is. But I know we get a lot of complaints. If you go by the 100-something complaints we get every year, and that's the average. And we do find them now. But if you go by that, I would think it's anywhere from 20 to 40,000. But I don't know the number of what's out there. And that's the income. But certainly, in the interest of public health and safety, you'd have more time to deal with the public health issues. And now is a lot different than it was 10 years ago. Now we're charged with all this money that's coming to us from the state for computers and phone money. They expect us to be prepared for infectious disease outbreaks, for terrorism outbreaks. We meet once a month. We have trainings. It's all included in distribution of vaccine. in the event anything happens. So we are constantly training for that, and we have deliverables that we have to meet that are hard to meet when you're running out doing this stuff. So if we don't do that, the money dries up from the Department of Public Health and the CDC. So when you free your time up on one end, you're able to do other stuff and get more money in. So I think it's a win-win situation if ever that can happen.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other? You good? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Very informative.
Thank you.
The Harbor Master.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just briefly introduce this. Gary will give you an update of the department. On the worksheets that were not administered before we produced the worksheets would be a $2,000 stipend for the harbor master pursuant to my direction as he has coordinated and produced a Safe Summer 2011 with the lifeguards. So that's standard fare for what we have. So we'll have to add that in once again after this worksheet was produced before that disbursement was made to Gary. But I'll turn it over to Mr. Buckminster.
Hello. Good afternoon. Now, please, I'm sorry. If you would, the floor is yours.
Okay, just a breakdown on the budget request. I had a few line items that did go up under my request. Obviously, payroll has gone up because we're in a step process now with the two new, myself and the assistant harbor master. So there's a couple grades that we have changing throughout the year here. So to offset some of the costs, my payroll did go up. Part of my request is actually going to be a transfer of funds to come to the requested amount that that my request was on the, as proposed to the administrator's request, which is $243,426. My request was $267,125. I'd be requesting a $25,000 transfer out of the HSP funds to offset half the cost of the seasonal personnel, as we did last year. That will give me staffing for evenings, weekends, give us 2 boat operators. The boats don't leave without 2 people on it. So that will, my numbers reflect a request of transfer of funds. The overtime went up not very much. It's only because of the pay scale change with the assistant harbor master for his call-outs, coverage, overtime, storms, things of that nature. I did add, going down into expenses, for the most part, they were all, they just reflect the same requests as last year. I did do an increase in the building supplies, in equipment supplies that covers soaps, detergents, things of that nature to keep the bathrooms sanitary. It also covers vehicles being washed and boats being maintained and things of that nature for cleaning supplies. I increased the equipment and building supplies. I apologize, repairs and maintenance because of the cost of just doing business with the marinas, winterizations, repairs, shrink wrapping, general repairs that we can't do in-house that we actually have to have the marinas take care of. The new, obviously all the new motors require computer components, things of that nature, so I did request a increase on my line item. I put boat and fuel, boat and vehicle fuel as a separate line item. Last year it was taken out and incorporated into other energies, which Mr. Trudell caught me on last year. I put that as a separate line item. I believe yours is 77. I requested 9,000 because fuel costs. I have to buy fuel at the marinas for the bigger boats because it's not cost effective to haul the boats out every time to fuel them up. They're just too big and it's not safe to continue to pull the boats out once a week. Okay. Cellular phones, just the contracts and fees. You'll notice a drop in other energies and propane. That was because I reduced the gas out of it and transferred it to a different line item. So that's been from 7720 down to 2,000. And the other one that I did add in, which was a substantial change, was dockage space. And that is because we don't have a town facility that I can safely keep our assets at. I mean, we've got a $225,000 boat, I can't leave it in Onset Pier. I just like the place, but it'll be on the bottom. So I do have to, unfortunately, I do have expenses with the marinas to pay dockage. They're very good with me on working, pricing out on it, so I do need to keep it. It's a secure location, they have cameras, they have security guards at night, so just as a safety factor. And I felt that was one of the things, and that's been proposed over the past few years prior to Mr. Andrews, that we needed an item strictly for dockage, and that never came up, so I did insert it in at this time. I had some questions I believe you wanted to ask also on the budget.
Any questions, Mr. Trudell?
Thank you for being here. There was, in previous years, a question of storage of your boats and the capacity to not only store them, but for you to be able to work on them.
Yes.
Given the constraints that the town is under, progress on that seems to be zero. Has it gone forward?
We really haven't looked into it yet. The storage facility is obviously a work in progress, and I think it's something that maybe in the next year or so, if we come into fall and start at least getting the engineering plans drawn up for a complex that it doesn't have to be large. It can be, say, like a Morton steel building where we can do work inside. Right now, all of our work is done outside. Most of the boats we can winterize ourselves. We have, I know how to do some of the mechanical repairs on it. So we've cut down on some of our expenses because we can do it ourselves with some of these boats. However, like I said, the other ones that are a little more advanced, so we can't handle it. So work-wise, fiberglass repair we can do. We're working on markers. We're building docks. So all these winter projects, if I could get them inside, that's great. Right now, fortunately, we're in the weather, so but docks can be built inside, things of that nature. So at some point, yes, it would be nice to start looking into something that can handle these.
I know that with boats too, I think it's Atlantic boats.
Yes.
Part of the Tremont complex.
Yes, we do.
And then you talk about the engineering work of getting a facility. Have any thought been given to what we garner for lease money versus what it would cost us for another facility? And would that facility be useful to the community?
I used the Tremont Metal Building in the past prior to Atlantic Boats leasing it. They use the whole building. It's an extremely expensive operation because of the heating system in there, things of that nature. Buildings, I think it dates back to early 80s, I'm assuming, somewhere in there. So there would be some modifications. I mean, if they ever were to move out of it and we divided the building or whatever the town sees fit. I mean, we've used it. We had our boats in it for one season. It worked out well because I was able to keep the temperature stabilized. So we had gel coat repairs I did, and we did just general maintenance. So all winter long we were able to update it. But I think it would be better to have our own facility, and we work so much with municipal maintenance on different things. Because of the size of their equipment, moving docks, it's just convenient being with them. So,
Mrs. Brown?
Thank you for coming, Gary. I've got a couple of, actually, 3 questions. First one is, what kind of income do you generate?
With everything, dump stickers, I believe we're at around 345,000, somewhere ballpark. That's with dump stickers, shellfish permits, mooring fees, and some of the new fees that we established. On the harbor service permits themselves, we generate about 120,000. About 24,000 of that is generated through the per foot, and when you break it down, because the boats that are on moorings, they pay the $60 fee, then they pay a per foot fee on top of it. And that 23,707, that's how many total feet that we have in boats that are on moorings right now. And then the fees collected for the permit itself is about 95,000.
Okay. Now, I see that you requested,
May I interrupt? Mr. Andrews, could you have a schedule prepared for us with those numbers, please? A
Sure thing.
document that
Yes.
tells us exactly
Sure.
what those
Yeah,
revenues
absolutely.
were. All right, and for our next meeting, please?
Sure thing, Mr. Chairman. It's a question that was just raised a couple
Yes, no,
seconds
I
ago.
understand, but I think it's something we've had interest in, and just,
Sure thing.
since you, that's why the question came up. So if you could, that would be just fantastic. Sorry, Mr. Brown.
you had $5,400 that you requested for other purchase services, and you were adjusted to $3,800. What type of services did that include, and what might not you be getting because you're down to 38?
I actually, if you have a copy of that, I do need the adjusted, because I didn't see the adjustment. Is it in here?
Okay.
Just to go offhand on it, it's going to be things like contacting, we usually have to have divers do all of our town moorings.
Right.
That we do this inspection process on a yearly base rather than a 3-year base that we require with the town, because we put other people's assets on our moorings. So we pay for our divers to go check, make sure the moorings are done. If there's expenses with chain, shackles, pennants, things of that nature, we try to make sure that that's every other year we're replacing that. Moorings that we extract right now, we don't have a fee structure set up to try to get back that money, which that's actually part of my proposal. But if we have to get larger moorings out, we have to contact a dive service to go in and actually extract those. That helps us maintain the chain on our navigational markers. We have probably about 100, we're up to about 100 navigation blades right now between red and green nuns and cans, no wake markers, swim buoys, things of that nature. So, I mean, we're using basically thousands of feet of chain every year because of the small gauge that we're using. So those figures are pretty accurate with the amount and the cost of it, because galvanized chain, you're looking at $1,000 a drum, and we go through 2 a year. So
My question is, how are you going to be able to live with that type of an adjustment from $5,400 to $3,800?
well, that's going to be requested through the change. If I could, I can go with the town administrator's request if I could get support in transferring the funds to operate my seasonal personnel, and we leave the expenses as they're listed here. So it would be on the town's end of it. My budget would be reduced by $25,000 out of the seasonal payroll, and then I would request to transfer $25,000 into that. But that would offset the figures that are changed here. If we could leave the expenses the same and change the numbering around into the payroll.
So what you're saying is you can't live with that number, that it's going to have
I mean, I
to be
could,
rearranged.
but things are expensive, unfortunately. I mean, we
No, I'm not-
don't get many breaks on it.
I'm not questioning what you're saying, but I'm just saying if this is an unreasonable number, we want an accurate number. And if this is an accurate number, how can you possibly, well, in essence, what you're saying is you're going around the back way to fund what you really need, but you're not getting it on paper as we see it. And I want to see how you're really getting this money. I want to know the intricacies of how you're getting there.
Right. Well, I mean, I can't answer the town administrator on the changes of the two proposals. My figures are just because of work practices and expenses. I mean,
Well, I understand that.
You're looking at $100 an hour for dive services and things of that nature, and just the general expenses we incur from steel and costs of maintaining what we have. So.
Mr. Chairman, also as a footnote, if I might, this, as we've talked about, is a starting point, and there will be adjustments made. And I firmly believe that the people who are paying the permits and fees to use the docks and the systems, we ought to reinvest that into the docks and systems and use it for maintenance of what we have through the Harbor Master's operations. So certainly, we can make adjustments, but the idea is that Gary's a little different kettle of fish, if you will, because he can he's taking advantage of fees and mooring and other permits that are being collected through his office. It's a little bit different than, the library or some of the other departments that don't have that ability. So it's just a starting point, and, working with Gary, I'm sure we can adjust the lines to fit, to keep the budget not only balanced, but to keep it workable from his standpoint.
And I am working just within the bylaws that were proposed, that were accepted for the use of the funds, because it's all regulated under state law. And I believe last year we had to submit paperwork talking about how the funds are used for it. If we can use it to offset, as it states in the bylaw, to offset costs associated with the Harbor Master Department, one of the big pushes was payroll, and that's where, like I said, if we can do the adjustments here in the expenses end of it and make our changes in personnel services, if we could fine tune that would be great. Obviously, it's a work in progress.
I just have one more comment, Mr. Minister. Let me just add that you do a remarkable job. You do a fantastic job. I have never heard one negative comment about you or your department.
Thank you very much.
And me as a town taxpayer and belonging to this town, I appreciate all the good work that you do. But the only thing that I want to see is, I want to see the real numbers. If you say you need $5,400, if you tell me you need $5,400, I'm like, I know this guy. Well, I don't know you personally, but he must need it. And we want to see it funded accurately for you, because you do run a tight ship, and you do run a...
It's tough to, I hate to, and I'm not trying to bounce around on, but it is tough to gauge, because, like this year, we have to do a big replacement of chain. I've already placed an order, I think it was $2,200 just for chain alone and some updates. So, I mean, I know I have services that are coming up that will fall within that number this year, and it'll be pretty close to that figure. Next year, who knows? We could pull everything out, and we could be in great shape and not have to use that. So, I mean, obviously, it would be a fund that could be turned back in. So it's just, unfortunately, it's a roller coaster of funding on that line item.
And we have your
life jackets.
Your number is
things of that
267, right? So we do have your number.
Let's see, 54, I believe you said it was.
Well, it's $5,400 for that line item, but your total...
No, what I'm
is
saying in total is 267.
My total, yes, my request was 267, 125.
So we do have his number, right?
Right.
We do have his number. Mr. Paulson, you had a question?
Yes, I have actually several questions, but they're all related. Can you give us some idea as to how many of the various berths and spots you have available for voters are held by out-of-towners?
We have about, figures here, I want to say that we have about 85% is going to be ballpark on what we have for residents on our moorings. The remainder is mixed up between non-residents and the marinas. I think it's last time we checked, we were around maybe 200 people that were non-residents. We've got 54 mooring locations that we oversee, where every area of town is designated into its own mooring field. And actually, it's growing because we're finding that there's so many communities that surround different waterways that we have different mooring fields in one body, like Sunset Cove. So there's going to be 3 new mooring fields that are going to be identified. So we're going to probably look in the range of 54 to 65 different locations. So, and unfortunately, with the moorings, it's a first come, first serve. It is regardless of residency.
And if somebody doesn't use their mooring but pays their mooring fee, I'm thinking now the out-of-towners, they still have the privilege of holding on to that?
They have privilege to hold on to it for 2 years, and after the second year, they either have to give it up or they have to put a boat on it.
Can we enforce that?
For the most part, I'm down to 60, I believe 68 moorings now at this point that are over the 2-year limit.
68.
Out of 1,600.
Wow.
So 68. And when you send out a bill, you mail it out to the people, be they in Boston or Lawrence?
Yes, we do.
And there's no extra charge for that service? I have a reason for asking that question specifically. They have to be notified, but the law, as I understand it, does not mean that we have to notify them by mail.
Under the bylaws, I have to notify them. Under our waterways bylaws, I've got X amount of time that I have to notify them certified mail. That's where we have to break into the bylaws and start streamlining some things also.
And sending the certified mail, we charge them for that?
Yeah, no, we don't. We put a $25 service fee, well, yes, we would, $25 service fee on top of the,
Okay. And you're thinking of
permits.
streamlining that?
yes.
Okay.
One of the proposals is, the mooring onlys, I understand people, sometimes they sell a boat and they don't know what they're gonna do with it. So give them a year, give them 2, but I think to make it a little more aggressive on that part, that fee for a mooring only should be doubled. And we talked about that with the Marine Resource Committee on increasing that fee to, let's say, $125 per year for a mooring only. So they're going to sit there and they're going to get a bill and they say, well, do we continue paying this or can we continue doing this and move it? I mean, we're operating the biggest marina in the town. So if you look at it, and all these marinas are pushing 100 boats. We're pushing almost 2,000. So, and space is in high demand. So.
Okay, thank you.
Mrs. Cattouli?
I just want to, Mr. Chairman, clarify what I'm reading here. So the regular salaries, the 159,623, that's going to be covered in the budget. And you're saying the harbor service fee is going to cover the part-time and the overtime?
This number actually should be on the 160 again.
Personnel expenses have to get adjusted.
Gotcha. Right, so, yeah, I'm on my figures for the 168,000. That's going to cover vacation days. I'm sorry, holidays, things of that nature. So, I believe they're going to have to be adjusted for expenses.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Mr. McDonald?
Oh, boy, still asking. First time, is this the first time we used that fund for personnel payroll?
No, it isn't. We used it last year also.
But before that, did we do that in?
We have used it in the past, yes.
My concern is that, we're talking about a building, possible building,
Mhm.
we're talking, I don't know what you have as far as capital items going up 4 or 5 years.
Yep.
But a lot of the costs that would normally fall under something else
Mhm.
could be paid for with that as well.
Could be, yes.
And I'm not saying that it's a bad thing to use it,
Right.
because at this point in time, we have to use whatever we can get. Apparently, we're just going to have to do that. But I see that you talked about a building, and that's a huge expense, I
Mhm.
think.
Correct.
And that money, instead of looking at it as a long-term, looking at it as a capital expense to the town, it can be covered by that fee.
Yes, it could. And
So-
the thing is, with the money that we're collecting through those fees, right now, we're at this point, we're in pretty good condition. With the exception of keeping up some of the waterways and the markers and things of that nature. I don't foresee having to go for any huge items at this point.
Okay.
We were talking about possibly doing something like a mooring barge to try and eliminate the costs of doing divers, because trying to line them up is crazy. But if we actually have something in place where we can go and manage each mooring field, where we can extract and do this stuff, I think that would be my biggest expense in the next 3 years anyway. So hopefully we could sit there and increase, look at the different fees that we're collecting now and build that source up, and then we could look into that a larger capital item at that point. But I mean, I don't see a building within the next 5 years. I guess I can throw it at that. But if we could limit the amount of money that we're pulling out of it, with the exception of dealing with some payroll issues with the seasonal personnel, which I mean, they're my left arm. They're that important. So if I can use some of that money to offset those costs with some minor requests, I think we could probably establish that fund enough. And just through shopping and just really seeing what we need for a building, I think we can get the numbers in a pretty reasonable fashion.
That's kind of where we're going. It's like
Yeah.
if we manage that fund
Yep.
appropriately, and obviously you need these part-time people out
Yes.
there. How are you going to get them? The other thing is, without increasing any of your fees, which I think you just did recently this last year, was that?
We added different fees. We didn't increase the brunt money, which was the harbor service permits.
Do you see any other revenue sources? Is there anything that's untapped? I'm not talking about it.
Oh yeah, through, when you break down the other towns, it ranges unbelievably. We had, the town of Marion, their fee right now is $60 plus $4 a foot. And then they have a commercial rate which they charge for the marinas, which is double that. So they're generating $300,000, $330,000 a year. Then you go to the town of Bourne, and their permit's $70 and $150, but they don't charge for boats on docks. So each one has their own mechanism. The best one I've seen so far was Falmouth, and they have a fee structure which we've been looking at for derelict moorings, reenactment fees, things of that, where if we're going to pull a mooring out, if you want it back, you're going to pay us for pulling that mooring out, and then you're going to pay for reinstatement of it. So I think there are a few issues that we need to break down and get a more structured fees and things of that nature. But I do think that we're pretty inexpensive. The town of Plymouth, he's got 560 boats, and he's charging $8 a foot. So, and that's a pretty big number of push. So.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Trudell?
Refresh my memory if you would. I recall some docking repairs, but I don't recall in your 5-year plan a request to look at a mooring barge, or I don't see it in this year's plan, ultimately a building for housing that.
The building is in the capital. The mooring barge, I thought I added in as it might be listed as a workboat.
Okay, all right. What I'm curious about is you've traditionally funded everything through your service account.
Yes.
To Mr. McDowell's point, have you laid out a long-range plan for those funds that shows how much you expect to come in each year, how much you're laying aside for your workboat and your building, so that there is some accountability that someone can look at and say, this is a plan, and when we deviate from the plan, both the Board of Selectmen, FinCom, Capital Planning, and Town Administrator would want to know about that. Do you have that kind of a setup?
Not into a 5-year, but I mean, that's something that can be generated, I think, quite easily.
Would that be acceptable to the Town Administrator?
Mr. Chairman, to Dave's point, we've encouraged all of our departments, when you hear from some of the other departments later today, to look at long-range pro forma, to project out the best we can, because in the end, a hiccup could change something. Bessie Park's a great example. I know Gary had to work to change a lot of the docking systems out, to expand the docking systems. That's an investment from the state of $500,000 and 250 locally that will hopefully generate a lot of activity at Bessie Park. And so the point is well taken. We're looking for, within reason, because I think in some cases, I'm not sure anybody around this table can project out, what the stock market's going to do 5 years from now. But the idea would be to get, all the variables in place, project out what they are, because there will be some operational needs, as he's indicated, and then take those out of the equation and say, at the end of the day, we can afford whatever he'd like to put in place.
And to follow through on that,
Yes.
one of my concerns happens to be his vehicle fleet, which he traditionally is also funded out of that
Yes.
account, and I don't want to see him fall behind on his operational needs versus salary. That's my concern, is because of the vehicles and the boats and the long-term planning. This is the second year we've tapped into that account, and I'm beginning to get nervous in terms of kind of like what I wanted to see with the CPC. I want to see some kind of a long-term plan that kind of calms my nerves in this area, if you will.
Certainly understand that. Certainly understand.
Mr. Paulson?
Well, two questions. Dave just touched on it here. How big is the account currently, and how big will it be?
Right now, we're sitting at on about 81,000. We will, by the end of, usually about, I want to say August, we'll have another 120,000 on top of that.
But you're taking some,
I would be requesting, if I could request 25,000 out of that, so we'd
so you'd be up
we'd
around
pushing around
200,000,
200,000.
25, so you'd be at hopefully
About
about
175.
175. Okay, and the next question deals with mechanics. You mentioned Falmouth, I believe it was, has a plan that looks attractive in terms of how they charge.
Yes.
And you used the word for us as inexpensive. So how do we go from inexpensive, where we need money, to, I'll use Falmouth, to Falmouth? Can you just do that unilaterally, or do you have to go to?
I didn't understand what you're saying, though, on
We have a fee structure.
Mhm.
You're looking at different fee structures.
Correct.
Right, and I thought you used Falmouth as an example.
I did, yeah, Falmouth's got the most, they're broken down the most of all the other towns around us. Their fee structure is, they've got probably 20 different articles, because they own marinas, they do a few things, but for the fees that I see that they offer, I think that's something that we should do too,
But
besides
you,
this.
okay, and you characterized us as inexpensive.
Mhm.
So I take the inexpensive, and you're suggesting again that maybe we should do something like Falmouth. How do you get from inexpensive here to Falmouth, if Falmouth is the model? You recommend it and the selectmen pass it? I mean, we need
The
money
selectmen
now.
the selectmen are allowed to, I would have to propose it, and the Board of Selectmen would have to accept the fee.
But that's
change.
about all that's necessary?
Yeah.
I shouldn't say about all, but
I think it's like chapter 4, is it chapter 40, 22F, I think it is.
basically, if you would recommend it, the selectmen would look at it, and they would say yea or nay,
Yes,
and we have the possibility of having more money come into the town.
yes, we would.
More money into the town in the near term.
More money into that fee, that harbor service permit, we would, yes.
Okay, well, that's a question, yeah.
That's the question.
Yeah.
Any further questions? They said it all, I don't have to say it. Thank you very much, Mr. Buckner. Thank you for your time.
Yeah.